Hey everyone, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to solder on an XLR microphone connector. So I have the cable here. I'm going to go about a razor blade's length in, maybe just a little bit less, about an inch or so in, and just lightly press as I roll the cable. And you don't want to feel too much resistance there because there's a metal sheathing underneath this that you do not want to cut. Once you have that, then you'll go ahead and pull that thing off there, and that should expose then the ground wire. With the ground wire then, here, I'm going to focus in a little bit. There we go. So that should expose that ground wire, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and unwrap that ground wire from the inner core, which are the two other leads, the red and the blue leads. And you will also see some nylon string, two pieces of white nylon string. I'm going to go ahead and kind of pull this ground wire as taut as I can kind of off to the side to straighten up all of those various strands, and then I'm going to start twisting them all together into a very tight wind. We do not want any stray strands of wire. So notice how much I straighten that stuff up and really get that stuff tightened up. And then I'm going to cut off this excess white nylon string. I'm just going to use the razor blade and just snip it right off there. If you have some excess nylon string hanging out there, that's going to be fine. And then you'll see I've got the two other blue and red leads, so you should end up with all three leads available to you. And then the next step that you're going to do is using the wire cutters. You're going to go about 1/4 of an inch in on the red and blue strands, and you're going to expose that wiring. Let me try a couple times here. There we go. You expose that wiring about 1/4 of an inch in, and I'm going to again kind of tighten up those strands so there's no loose strands. I'll do that to the blue as well. Yep, almost there. There we go. Those are exposed. So I have about 1/4 of an inch. So I have all three of the strands exposed here. So I'm going to go ahead and use the helping hands here. And the next process is we're going to tin these wires. To do that, now we're going to use the soldering iron. And the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the soldering iron tip is clean. So I'm going to use the sponge here and clean that off a little bit. We don't want to set it on there for too long. And then using the solder, probably the biggest tip that I can give you is to dab a piece of solder right onto that iron, and that will help heat up any element much faster. Also, again, just make sure that you don't have any stray strands hanging out there. You have nice tight wind on the various leads. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch the bottom of the lead with the soldering iron and then push solder onto the lead. Hopefully you can see that well enough. And that will then start to melt. It will heat up the lead and start to melt solder onto the iron. You don't want to try to push solder onto the lead. You just want to heat up the lead underneath and then push solder onto the top of the lead to heat it up. We're going to do that then with the blue and red as well. Don't spend a lot of time. You also want to keep the tip of the iron clean, so I'm going to wipe off that excess soldering. I got a little excess bubble of solder because I had too much solder on the tip of my iron, so I'm just going to kind of wiping it off and then getting the excess off of the iron. All right, dab a little extra solder again, and then do the other lead. And again, I'm touching underneath the cable and then touching the top of the lead to melt solder into it. And getting solder smoke in my nose. All right. So the next thing we need to do is get the actual XLR connector. I'm going to dismantle this thing here. Let's unscrew the back. So not only do you have the connector back, you have the actual kind of wire grasp there that you have to make sure is part of it. And then on the, this is the female side here, I'm going to push and expose the, you can see it's actually inside there. I have to kind of push this thing out and then pull out the inner connector here. So you can set the metal sheathing aside, but it's very important that you actually put the backing on the actual cable at this point. So you're going to go from the small end and place the 3 leads through the small end, all right, and then push that thing forward. It won't seem like it's going to fit at first, but it will. And then just kind of push this thing down to the bottom, or not to the bottom, but just away from yourself. And then you also need to place the wire harness on, and you're going to put the little jaws in first. So the 3 cables are going to go through those jaws. Let's see if I can manipulate this here. So it should look something like that, where the jaws go in first, or are facing downwards, I should say. And then you can move that down out of your way as well. So the next thing I'm going to do, just real quick, I forgot to mention, but I want to take all 3 of these leads and push them together. And then I'm going to take my wire clippers and just give them a really short haircut. I'm just going to take off just the very edge, just to make sure that they're all 3 exactly the same. I barely cut off any of the wiring. I just wanted to make sure that they were all the same size. So I just cut off a tiny little bit of all 3. The next thing we need to do is actually tin the connector itself. The 3, remember we have the pin 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to use my helping hands here, maybe, to hold that. And to tin these leads, what you're going to do again is get the tip of your iron clean, dab a little bit of solder onto the iron. You're going to touch the back of the little cup that you see, and then you're going to push solder into the front of the cup. So I'm going to touch the back very quickly and then push solder into the front of the cup. You have to be quick. You don't want to hold the iron onto that cup very long, because it will melt, so be careful. Let's try that again on another one. So again, I'm touching the back of the cup with the iron and dab a little bit more solder on the iron. And then I'm pushing solder into the front of the cup. We'll do the same thing on the 3rd one. And I'm going in and out real quick. You do not want to, again, hold that iron on that lead for very long, because it will melt it, so be very careful. Again, clean off the tip, and now we are ready to make the connection. So again, pin 1 is the ground wire. On here you'll see pin 1, 2, and 3 listed. Pin 1 is the ground wire. Pin 2 is red. Pin 3 is blue. So I'm going to start, personally, I like to start with the 3rd pin, which is the one in the middle. I'm going to use the blue lead here. We are going to, again, dab a little bit of solder onto our iron to help heat up that iron a little bit quicker. Then I am going to touch the back of the pin and push the lead into the cup. That thing will automatically melt the solder and should suck it right in. So notice I left my hand hanging there while it cooled down. You could blow on it a little bit if you need to. All right, so that is our first pin. I just had my cable come out here. I need to put that back together. There we go. All right. So then we are on to pin number 2, which is the red lead. So we'll kind of manipulate this a little bit here so we can get that red lead hanging out inside that cup. I'm going to touch the back And that thing should melt right in. The minute you see it melt, move the iron away so that way it cools down. And then finally the ground on pin 1. So I kind of manipulate that cable to be sitting in that pin for me, and then heat up the back very quickly. In and out. It'll suck itself right in there. All right, so I have all 3 connected. Let me get this all put back together here. All right. So all 3 pins are connected. Again, pin 1 is ground, pin 2 is red, and pin 3 is blue. Then what we're going to do is take that outer shell. You're going to see a little ledge on this this plastic connector here. That's got to line up, that ledge needs to line up with the same ledge that's inside of here. So you kind of circulate it around until you'll see a tiny little ledge, almost like a little puzzle that's got to be put together. And real quick, I see a little excess solder. I'm going to just scrape away. There we go. Push that in there, and then bring the other connector, the jaws connector. Find the little ledge on the jaws connector and line it up with the ledge inside the gray, or I'm sorry, inside the black metal housing. So then you've got those guys together, and then you finally bring up the back housing, kind of squeeze, just lightly squeeze those jaws together, bring that thing up and screw it in. Oh, we got to get that in there just a little bit further here. There we go. And that is that. Once I can get this thing actually going here. There we go. That'll screw, and as you screw that in, it actually tightens those jaws for us to give us all 3. And there's our connector.